Hi there, working preachers. This is Karoline Lewis along with Matt Skinner and Rolf Jacobson. And here we are at Holy Week 2025. I can't believe we're here already.
We're taking a moment to say thank you for all of the hard work you've already done to prepare for Holy Week. We also want to encourage you as you write your final sermon or sermons for the days ahead.
We hope that you'll find inspiration from the resources posted on Working Preacher, whether it's this podcast, the mini text commentaries, or the videos and articles available for you and for others on workingpreacher.org and its YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram channels.
We are so grateful each and every year for the ways in which you so faithfully proclaim the mystery of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And we hope, working preachers, that you have a very blessed Holy Week.
Welcome to Sermon Brainwave with me, Matt Skinner.
And me, Rolf Jacobson.
And me, Karoline Lewis.
This podcast is for Maundy Thursday on April 17th, 2025. And the texts are Exodus 12, 1 through 14. You don't have to read verses 5 through 10, but you can if you may. Psalm 116, 1 through 2, and 12 through 19. 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26, and John 13, 1 through 17, and then 31b through 35. I believe these are the same texts every year for Maundy Thursday. I'm getting some nods.
Every year.
And I believe every year they keep skipping over the Judas part.
Every year.
In John 13, which is unfortunate, but I'm sure we'll get to that. But here we get foot washing and the so-called new commandment.
When you say every year they skip it, you make it sound like every year they make the same decision, as opposed to they made a decision once.
Because what I imagine is wherever this committee resides, that every year they hear this podcast and they hear Karoline appealing from the bottom of her heart to add these verses, and they say, "Nope. What do you think?" And they all go,
"No."
I don't even know if I don't think they say nope. I think they just all shake their heads slowly and
roll their eyes.
And then they say, "Oh yeah, next year it'll happen again."
Says, "I know what the word for squirrel is in Aramaic."
Really?
It's a famous Bruce Metzger story, but keep
going. Squirrel?
Yes.
Oh, did they have squirrels back then?
They still do, actually. Even.
I think squirrels have been around since Eden.
Wow. I did not know that.
I think they were created after the apple was eaten. Anyway, where were we?
Well,
washing the feet.
Yeah, but let's put everything out
Putting aside your grudges and resentments.
Yes. I will put those aside for a minute. But let's also put on the table, get it? The table?
Yeah, I get it.
The fact that we have the Passover, and we also have the Lord's Supper. So we've got a lot of things going on here. And it also acknowledging that traditions, like we talked about with Palm Sunday, I know a lot of churches do First Communion on Maundy Thursday. And so recognizing that all of those realities, rituals, markings will then shape the preacher's decision on which to preach, which text to preach, when it might not be the foot washing because there is no Lord's Supper.
Perhaps we should talk about all four texts then.
Wow, what a great idea. It's a great idea.
Love it.
All right. Should we start with the foot washing,
Let's start with the foot washing.
Okay.
And the new commandment. And Judas going out, and it was night.
Well, there are other verses that are also left out. And that would be verses 30 of the chapter. And that would be verses 36 to 38, which is Peter's denial, the foreshadowing of Peter's denial. So I said this before. I'll say it again. I'll say it probably every year. But that the reason to point that out is it really sets the pathos and poignancy of this night. This is not just the disciples. I mean, it's the disciples getting together with Jesus, being with Jesus the last night before he's arrested, and what will be the act of Jesus that they remember, that they will be asked to draw upon in what will follow, the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion. And in the Synoptic Gospels, that's this meal that Jesus institutes of his body and his blood. And so how does that undergird them? How does that support them? How is it that they'll take that giving of Jesus' body and blood then into what comes next? In John, that's different. In John, it's the foot washing. And which pathos and the poignancy of the evening is exacerbated by the betrayal of Judas. And the disciples, really to think about how would the disciples have responded to that when one of their own walks out, leaves. Those are the verses that are left out. He immediately went out, and it was night when he gone out. And then it's then that Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you, not simply as an imitation or keep doing this act, but to love so abundantly, love each other so much abundantly that you carry that love forward into what comes next. And so my caution always is this is not about foot washing per se, as it is about what the foot washing represents, which is true with all of Jesus' signs, and that's abundant love and abundant grace. And that they need this, they absolutely need this love, the love that they've experienced with Jesus, the love that Jesus experienced from Mary having his feet washed, that he carries forward. So he carries that love into the triumphal entry. He carries that love into being able to wash the feet of his betrayer and his denier. And then for the disciples, it is that love that will sustain them in listening to all the things that Jesus is going to say. And that's the other thing that I think is important with preaching this text, is that when chapter 13 ends, when the love commandment, then Jesus has 14, 15, 16, and 17, which are all hugely troubling words. You will be thrown out of the synagogue. Your hearts are troubled. I am leaving you, but I won't leave you orphaned. 4 whole chapters of listening to Jesus' words. And what makes listening to that possible? Love, experiencing that love, really resting in that love. And so that's, I think that's hugely important.
It's the quality of this love that I wonder about or am stunned by. Verse 35, everyone will know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. Jesus must know about other friendship groups or other societies where people loved each other. It's not like Christians invented the idea of love or something like that. I think sometimes we jump to like agape and say this is a special kind of love or something like that, which is a shortcut that doesn't work. But I mean, what is the quality of this love? Is the fact that it's self-giving? Greater love has no one than this, that they lay down their life for their friends? Is it that kind of a, do you know what I mean? This sounds so easy. If the church could just love each other well, everybody would know that we're Jesus' disciples. But is it that we lack the quality of love, or is it, do you see what I mean? Like what's...
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it is so much dependent on the entirety of John, it's an overflowing, abundant love, and it really going back to verse 13 or chapter 13, verse 1. He loved them to the end, which that end is the same verb as is the same root as it is finished in John. Telos, right?
Not necessarily the end point in time.
No, but he
completion.
loved them to completion, to its final goal. So it has a kind of, it's a quality of love that is full of abundance, but it doesn't, it's hard to describe in many ways. I mean, it's a love that has absolutely no bounds, that will go to the very end. How will it be completed? How will it be fulfilled? What kind of goal does it have? And the goal that it has, I think, is actually also rooted in John 3:16. For God so loved the world. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that's also key, that it's not only a love that defines who they are, but it's a love that calls them also into the world to love as Jesus did.
Is it helpful to bring condescension into that as well? This idea of Jesus who wraps himself with a towel, washes feet, he's nobody in the ancient world who's free wants to take on a slave's role. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nobody who's the leader of the group wants to be in a position of serving them. I'm not nobody. There's a status inversion going on here that we sometimes miss because we just think this is Jesus being polite.
I think that's part of it. But it's not all of it. I think a lot of what is happening here, as you said, comes later in the farewell discourse. I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. And since Mary did that to him, he is now doing it to the disciples. I think at its heart, it is a sign of mutuality and reciprocity, that this is what relationship looks like. This is not a one-sided. He needed to be loved as much as he loves them. And this is what that reciprocity, that mutuality of love is, I think, and the way in which he is hosting. I mean, he's welcoming in many respects. He's welcoming the disciples into this meal as host, which he also did in chapter 6, and he'll do again in chapter 21, but really welcoming the disciples into what the home or the abode of being with Jesus and God will look like in chapter 14, verse 2. In my Father's house, there are many abodes. So it's really welcome. It's not just welcoming into the house and doing what a servant does. It's really a welcoming into what does this abode, this abiding place look like.
One more question. So one thing, there's also the note about cleanliness.
Mm-hmm.
So that you won't wash my feet. If I don't wash you, you won't be clean. Well, then wash my head too. No, you're already clean. Right? So, but without, I mean, all right, you're clean. You don't need to do it again. So, but obviously, then he says, not all of you are clean.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you make of the cleanliness theme? Because I was talking with my family this week about issues of ritual uncleanliness and cleanliness in Judaism, which we don't have anything like that in Christianity. Mm-hmm. So we tend to think about it as sin. Mm-hmm. And at least in the Old Testament, cleanliness, ritual cleanliness and uncleanness are not about sin. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what is this here? This seems to be about sin since it's about betrayal.
Well, that is in part what I think there is a connection. You have to contextualize it, right? Which is what you're saying, that how John is thinking about what unclean is a direct reference to Judas, and it's Judas's betrayal, which at the end of the day is sin. I mean, sin is, for John, not being in relationship with Jesus or walking away from that relationship. And so then the water becomes kind of, it's not about water at the end of the day. It's about the way in which this is the reality of Judas's betrayal, which is another, and we need to go on, but another theme here is putting people in the place. I mean, sometimes, I don't want to say it's easy, but sometimes with Judas, we so locate the understanding of Judas in the Synoptic Gospels of the one who hands Jesus over at his arrest, and is it, money motivated or whatever. But in John, it lifts up the fact that betrayal can happen at any time. And here it happens at the most intimate, he's just had his feet washed by his disciples. And then the contrast with the beloved disciple in 13:23. And then Judas, basically what Judas is walking away from is that relationship. And I think that could be another really powerful direction on Maundy Thursday, to talk about what does betrayal here mean. It's not handing over Jesus at his arrest. It's deciding to walk away. Okay, we could keep on going forever and ever. Let's go to Exodus.
The first Passover.
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to preach on the Passover other than as context for Maundy Thursday. So it's helpful context. I'd point people to the commentary, especially appreciate the John Anderson's treatment there and quotation of Brevard Child's notion, which I buy, where he says something like, he says, God's redemption is not simply a political liberation from an Egyptian tyrant, although it is that, obviously, but also involves the struggle with sin and evil and the transformation of life. I guess maybe the thing about the overall story of the Passover narrative, Exodus 1 through 14, is it is a death struggle regarding who will be Israel's Lord. And I think that could then actually maybe frame what the whole passion is about too, which is it's a death struggle about who will be Lord of all life. So in Exodus, it's who's going to be Israel's Lord? The Pharaoh, the god of death, who wants to enslave the people and keep them in bondage in one place, or the Lord of life, who wants to free them and set them to go elsewhere. And then you could kind of maybe take that and say, and what's the passion about? The passion is about the same thing, is who will be Lord? Is it of who will be your Lord? Who will be Lord of the planet? The one who is willing, the one who puts others to death, or the one who's willing to die for others? Something like that, I suppose.
I really like that. I mean, I don't like it because it's hard.
Saying. It's good news.
But I really like that as a framing of what the passion is about, and then to connect it to the first Passover. I mean, that could be. I think that would be a great sermon. I mean, so would John, but
no, it is John. It sets up John.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It connects nicely to it being year C. I know that we already had the Passion narrative in Luke on Sunday for Passion Sunday, but that's where Jesus is arrested and says this is the power of darkness. In other words, this is not just Rome versus me or the chief priest versus me. There's a different drama taking place at a different level here, similar to the Exodus story where Pharaoh is not just a human king or something like that.
Yeah, right. In the words of Walter Brueggemann, you met one Pharaoh, you met them all.
There's that. Don't do a Christian Seder. That's all I have to say about Exodus 12.
Oh, yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, I will say that there are many congregations that do it in relationship with their Jewish neighbors, and that is a very different thing.
Correct. I would say that's not a Christian Seder, but an interfaith Seder. But yeah, I'm not.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we agree.
Yep.
All right.
What would you do with the Psalm?
116. What would you do with it?
Well, again, here's a text that they're using, at least the lectionary is using, to make sense of what's happening. It's got these famous verses that are worth just knowing about. I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. Those of us that understand salvation will take a drink of coffee now.
In a latte.
Yes, thank you. And
go right ahead.
And verse 15, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones, which is an odd it's as translated, it's very literal, but it's very odd. What do you mean? How is it's precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones? But rather, I think it means something more like, even as God's faithful ones are dying, they're still precious to God. And so that's true of Jesus too. In the Dutch tradition, which our friend Hans Weersma is from, he's got a picture of his, I think his grandparents who he never met, and on the back or some family member, maybe his grandparents wrote. I can't remember the exact story, but it simply has this verse. It's a very important verse for the Dutch tradition of making sense of the death of loved ones. And on the back, it's simply that verse that names it. And I think that in a culture where we are more and more distance ourselves from the dying, and especially those that are dying who are no longer conscious and they're just wasting away, and that someone in that condition, the text is saying, is equally as precious to God as the most active, vital, vibrant, healtty person.
It's a weird line to hear during Holy Week without it being explained.
Yeah,
given the translation.
Yeah.
It does risk being misheard in terms of why does Jesus have to die or something like that. But, All right, 1 Corinthians and Paul's description of the Lord's Supper, which of course everybody knows doesn't come in a vacuum. It becomes he's chastising the Corinthians for their misuse of the meal and their approaching the wrong way. I'm not sure that's
pretty sure that not everybody knows that. So why don't you just
I hope our listeners know that. How about that?
Just take a second and say what you mean.
Our listeners might know that, but to whom they are preaching might not.
Yeah.
Which could be a really important.
And even those of us that know it, because these words are taken and used liturgically in my church every week, that you forget. So helpfully remind us, Matt. What are those lousy Corinthians doing?
I can't resist an invitation like that. This is a church that's known for its striving and its factionalism, its smugness of one group towards others, smugosity.
Wow, factionalism and smugness.
Exactly. Nothing that you've ever experienced in a modern church.
Never.
I'm sure.
Or a seminary.
Or a seminary.
Or a podcast.
Denomination.
No smugness here. And one of the problems is they appear to be practicing the Lord's Supper, which was done over meals, ordinary in people's homes, according to the standards of broader Greco-Roman culture, which is you've got a nice table, people get to sit in certain spots. You can bring your slaves and children, wives, if you want. They're going to sit in a different room. And in this case, the wealthy are coming early, eating the good food. And then later on, the lower class members of the congregation are coming. And Paul, who at times in this letter is like, yeah, do whatever you want. Eat whatever you want. I don't really care. But here it's like, how dare you celebrate the Lord's Supper in such a way where you are reaffirming status differences that are culturally acceptable but have no place in the church. And in fact, he seems to be saying are an offense to the death of Jesus, which Paul sees as a great uniting moment where God breaks down barriers, divisions, et cetera. So important to know that he's not saying, hey, guess what? You've reached year 3 in your curriculum. It's time to teach you about the Lord's Supper. No, he recites this because what he's trying to do is reaffirm for them what kind of meal it is we're talking about, what this proclaims, not just the death of Jesus, gee, we miss him, but the death of Jesus as this uniting event.
Thanks. My favorite line, and I'd like you guys to say what you think it means, is, I don't know, Karoline and I both went to this seminary as students in a previous millennium. And we both heard many times the lecture about the different theologies of what's going on in the sacrament of the altar. Real presence, transfiguration, not transfiguration.
Transubstantiation.
Thank you. Transubstantiation.
Pulling out the big
simply
words
a
today.
memorial meal or but then this is very different, that it's a proclamation of the death. As often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death. What is that? So that as the church in its sacramental rite breaks the bread, distributes the wine, and does so in a non-class. I mean, like in my church, there's not a fast lane for the big givers. There's not a fast lane for the visitors. Hey, we want the visitors first. It's everybody gets in line and is treated the same, whether you can barely move or you're a kid that can barely sit still. We are all proclaiming the Lord's death. So how does that kind of, as we think about this in Holy Week, what do you think that means?
Well, I think I go back to what you said, Matt, in terms of locating that proclamation of the death as that unifying force, right? That it's what at the end of the day brings the divisive Corinthians together. It's what they are meant to hold on to. And I think that in and of itself would be a really helpful sermon to imagine that and to unpack as you're doing, Rolf, that phrase, because it could easily be just, we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes, and then we go, which means what, right? Are we supposed to go around and say Jesus died, Jesus died, Jesus died? But what did that death accomplish? What did that death actually mean? And especially, as you said, on Maundy Thursday. So if, I think, my sense is, what difference does it make to put it back into the context of why Paul is doing this here is helpful, because it gives specificity to that proclamation.
Yeah, it's a good question. I have like 10 answers in my head, and I promise I'm only going to give 2 of them. I mean, yeah, one is this idea that the death of Jesus breaks down these divisions. Another is that it's a death that actually benefits us. It's a death for you. Whatever that means is beneficial. It's also, I think I'm going to say 3 things. It's also a death of mystery, and it's a participation in a mystery. I close with a quick story.
We're sounding very Catholic suddenly.
Can I close with a quick story?
Dying, you destroyed death. Rising, you restored our life. End with the story.
Yeah.
A couple I used to know went to an Episcopal church, relatively high liturgy. When their kids were very small, they had them receive communion, take communion, whatever language we use. And after a service, one day somebody in the church said to the mother, "Do you think your kids really understand what's going on when they receive communion?" And she quipped back immediately, "I'm certain they don't. Do you?" Which I just love, right? That there's a mystery around the meal. There's a mystery around the death of Jesus. We know enough to know it's an act of love, of sustenance, of self-giving. Beyond that, not a mystery. Sermon Brainwave is a production of Luther Seminary's Working Preacher. Working Preacher has been a trusted source of inspiration, interpretation, and imagination for preachers worldwide since 2007. Find episodes and links at workingpreacher.org/brainwave. And be sure to rate, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. Thanks for joining us.